There is a lake in Butte, Montana that can kill a bird from the inside before it finishes landing. In the winter of 2016, a storm pushed a flock of snow geese down onto it, and within a day, thousands of them were dead. The internet says 10,000 birds died in the Berkeley Pit that night, and that number is wrong. But the birds are not the strangest part. Under that water sits a machine that can never be shut off, because the day it stops, the most toxic lake in America starts moving toward the ocean. The hole is almost a mile wide and 1,700 feet deep, and carving it meant erasing a mountain that had already helped build the country. Butte sits on top of what miners a century ago called the richest hill on Earth, and that was not advertising. Marcus Daly's Anaconda company started pulling copper out of that hill in 1881, and for the next 70 years, Butte supplied close to a quarter of all the copper in the United States. Every telegraph line, every artillery shell, every electric wire strung across the country carried a piece of that hill. The money it made built one of the largest cities in the American West, and 3 men rich enough to buy their own newspapers, their own judges, and in one case, a seat in the United States Senate. Historians call their feud the War of the Copper Kings. Marcus Daly was only the first of them. The copper ran straight down in vertical veins, so the mines went straight down after it. By the 1960s, the Kelly shaft reached about 4,800 feet, and there were thousands of miles of tunnel under the city, by some counts close to 10,000. You could have dropped the Empire State Building down the Kelly shaft and lost it 3 times over. That copper was not cheap in the way that matters. A 1921 Bureau of Mines study found that in the years around the First World War, 42% of Butte's underground miners had what they called miner's consumption, their lungs slowly turning to scar tissue from the rock dust. Thousands of men died under that hill over the years, most of them slowly from the dust. Because in 1955, Anaconda stopped chasing veins underground and started taking the whole hill away from the top, in terraces, with electric shovels the size of houses. They called it the Berkeley Pit, and the pit ate the city to feed itself. Whole neighborhoods, Meaderville and McQueen and the East Side, were bought out, emptied, and buried under waste rock. In McQueen, they did not even move the Holy Savior Church. They covered it. A man named Tom Holter, who had been an altar boy there, sold his family house for $14,500 and watched his street disappear. A 1961 Montana law had handed Anaconda the power to take the land it needed, and it used it. Stand at the pit's viewing stand today, and you can still make out the faint grid of Meaderville's streets on the far wall, a whole Italian neighborhood pressed into the rock like a fossil. The machines that dug the pit are long gone. What they left behind is still there, under the water. For as long as the mines ran, pumps ran with them. The tunnels under Butte want to fill with groundwater, and the only thing that kept the deep levels dry was pumps working every hour of every day. On Earth Day in 1982, the company that owned the mine, by then Atlantic Richfield, shut those pumps off for good. The water came back. It rose into the tunnels at roughly a foot a month, and it did not come back clean. For decades, the mining had exposed a mineral called pyrite to the open air. Pyrite is iron and sulfur, and when air and water reach it, it makes sulfuric acid. That acid then went to work on the rock, dissolving copper, arsenic, cadmium, and zinc straight out of the walls. By the time the water reached the floor of the pit and started to pool, it was not water anymore. It was acid, with a pH around 2.5, closer to battery acid than to anything you would call a lake. Today, there are more than 50 billion gallons of it, and that is why the geese die. the water burns through them from the inside. People who work around it say it can strip the paint off a boat and pit a steel propeller in a single season. The chemistry behind that is real, and it is exactly why the water is now valuable. There is enough dissolved copper and zinc and rare metal in it that companies have started treating the pit as an ore deposit in its own right. So the obvious question, the one people ask every time they see it, is simple. If it is that dangerous, why not just drain it, or fill it in, and be done with it? The answer is the whole story. You cannot drain the Berkeley Pit because it is the bottom of a bathtub. Groundwater flows into it from every flooded tunnel in the hill, and water does not run uphill to leave. Pump it out, and it fills right back in. The water is not sitting in a sealed pool. It is the visible top of a flooded network that runs for miles in every direction under the city, all of it draining downhill to the lowest point, which is the pit. And there is nowhere on Earth to put 50 billion gallons of acid. So the only thing that works is a machine that never stops. That machine is a water treatment plant called Horseshoe Bend, built above the pit in 2003. It runs the pit water through lime, which pulls the metals back out and lifts the acid toward something survivable. And it does this around the clock. And it exists to protect one number. The lowest stream bed in Butte sits at 5,410 feet of elevation. As long as the acid stays below that line, it stays trapped in the pit. If it ever rises above it, the water stops being Butte's problem and starts flowing out into Silverbow Creek, into the Clark Fork River, toward the Columbia, and toward the Pacific. In 2019, after the water had been climbing for 37 years, crews finally began pumping the pit itself and treating the water it held. The metals they pull out get sold. The water that comes off the back end is clean enough to put into a creek. And the plan, written into the federal cleanup order, is to keep doing this in perpetuity, which is the government's word for forever. Which brings us back to the birds, and to the number the internet keeps repeating. We went into the records from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the agency that actually collected the dead geese and cut them open to find out what killed them. The first mass death happened in 1995. 342 snow geese came down on the pit in a storm and died. Atlantic Richfield's first response was to blame tainted grain the birds had supposedly eaten somewhere else. Then the necropsies came back, and the birds' insides were lined with burns and blisters from the acid. The company quietly stopped talking about the grain. Since then, keeping birds off the water has become a permanent job. The site runs a hazing program with spotlights, loud cannons, and men with rifles firing over the flocks to scare them off, because a goose that lands and drinks is usually dead within a day or two. That program runs every night the birds are moving through. The night everyone remembers is November 2016. A storm forced an enormous flock down, and witnesses said the surface of the pit turned white with birds. Mark Thompson, the manager who monitors the site, described it as 700 acres of white birds. As many as 10,000 of them landed on the water. But here is where the internet gets it wrong. 10,000 landed. The number that died, according to the Fish and Wildlife Service, was 3,000 to 4,000. Tens of thousands of geese were in the area that week, and most of them lifted off and lived. The 3,000 to 4,000 that did not are the real number, and it is bad enough on its own. Then the pit did something nobody planned for. It started producing medicine. In the 1990s, two chemists at Montana Tech, Andrea and Don Steele, started lowering sample bottles into the most poisonous water in America to see if anything lived in it. Something did. They pulled out dozens of microbes that had learned to survive at a pH of 2.5, life that had no business existing there. This was the same husband and wife team that had earlier found a fungus that produced Taxol, one of the most important cancer drugs ever made. From one of the pit fungi, they isolated a compound they named berkelic acid, and when the National Cancer Institute tested it, it showed activity against ovarian cancer cells. The deadliest lake in the country turned out to be full of chemistry no one had ever seen. Researchers have since pulled dozens of new compounds out of that water, and the pit that Butte spent decades trying to contain became a place scientists fly in to study. Now there is a second reason people want into that water. It holds rare earth elements, the metals inside every phone screen and every missile guidance system, the ones the United States currently buys almost entirely from China. The Department of Defense is weighing a grant of around $75 million to build a plant that would strip those metals out of the pit while the water is treated. As Thompson put it, the rare earths are the sex appeal, but the zinc is what is going to pay the bills. If it works, the treatment plant would finally start earning back a piece of its own bill. None of that changes the machine, though, and the machine is not as safe as it sounds. In December of 2025, it stopped. The north wall of the pit began to move, and the pump station sat right underneath the unstable ground. Crews had to pull all three of the big pumps out and rebuild the whole station on the far side of the pit. For a few months, nothing was holding the water down but the treatment plant and time. The pit does not wait for the machine to be ready. The water still climbs, held for now a few hundred feet below the line it can never be allowed to cross. The danger is still there. It is simply being held down by the plant, at a cost that runs every year with no finish line. The copper from that hill wired a country and helped win 2 world wars. The company that made the money, Anaconda, became Atlantic Richfield in 1977 and later folded into the oil giant BP. Atlantic Richfield has now spent more than $1.4 billion cleaning it up, and the treatment plan has no end date written on it anywhere. The profit left town decades ago. The machine it left behind still cannot be switched off. There are more of these buried in the record, and we go looking for them every week. We will see you in the next one.